Welcome to the Jackson Rudolph podcast. I am your host, Jackson Rudolph, and this is episode 61, brought to you by the one and only, the legendary Black Belt Magazine. And as you can see, I am in front of the archives today instead of being in the studio, which means that it is time for another film study episode of the Jackson Rudolph podcast. Now, last week, I made a guest appearance on the Inside Scoop with Alex Dingman and Jeff Doss. That's a podcast hosted by the Martial Arts Internetwork. I highly recommend anybody tuning into this and that likes the Jackson Rudolph podcast, go check out their page as well, because they do a lot of great content, a wide variety of sport karate shows. But when I was on with Alex and Jeff and Sammy Smith, a Team Paul Mitchell member and fellow world champion, we were all on the show together, and we did kind of a roundtable discussion about the state of CMX competition, creative, musical, and extreme martial arts sport karate competition. Who's the cleanest competitor of all time? Who are some of the cleanest of today? How do the rules work today? What rules need to be changed? All of that type of discussion is what happened on that podcast episode on the Inside Scoop last week. And that got me thinking about, well, what are some of the best musical forms of all time? And if you're a true fan of sport karate, and if you've truly done your film study, you've probably stumbled upon a series of 2 videos on YouTube that is called the best musical forms of all time. The first video is 11th through 20th place, and then the second video is 10th all the way down to first place. And it's not just one competitor per form. Some competitors get multiple spots kind of throughout the countdown of the top 20. And so I got to thinking, for anybody that's ever seen those videos, number one, if you haven't seen them, we're going to show them to you here in this episode right now. But number two, did they get it right? Did the YouTube page that posted this top 20 musical forms of all time, which, by the way, forgive me if I pronounce this wrong, it's Sebricci, Sebricci on YouTube, I believe is the username who posted these videos all the way back in 2007. So we're talking about 14 years ago. This is what somebody thought the 20 best musical forms of all time were. Now, there are certainly some forms that have happened since 2007, some of Matt Emmig's forms in 2008, 2009, some of the Micah Carnes forms that happened in the 2010s, and there's other names on that list. Austin Crane, I could go on and on. There's other competitors and other forms since 2007 that probably should break into this top 20. Brendan Hewer's just another one throwing names out there. Marcel Jones should be on this list. And those competitors are not on this list. So this is what one person's opinion was of the best 20 musical forms of all time as of 2007, and we're going to dive into it today, and we're going to see how much of it they got right. And if you disagree with any of the rankings in the comments, go ahead and drop those in the comments down below. Let me know which form you think is the greatest musical form of all time. If you think it's a form that's happened since 2007 or a form that just wasn't mentioned in this countdown, go ahead, drop those YouTube links down in the comments below as well. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. And it is time for the top 20 musical forms of all time, according to Sebricci on YouTube. And anybody that knows this knows that there's like, I think it's some final countdown music that's playing for this like intro sequence. This is very much a 2007 looking YouTube video. As we get into 20th place, Jemma Nguyen at the French Open in 2002. Now, Jemma Nguyen, known for her kicking ability, she's going to put that on display here. And I'm going to go ahead and say this right now. I think that this form is underranked. I think that this form should have been ranked higher. We see her doing her signature kicking combo there. And this kick combo feels like it lasts forever. Look at that, holding the round kick. That was at least a 3-second hold. Then she goes into more kicks and then another hold on the round kick going into the axe kick. Just demonstrates the incredible kicking ability of Jemma Nguyen. And then another thing that I like about Jemma's form here is that she also mixes in a couple of hand combos throughout. It's not just kind of doing a chop punch here and there just to set up the kicks. She's mixing up the various martial arts techniques, doing some tricking kick techniques, also doing the stationary kicking. And then right there, we see the tricking right into the chop punch and then the stationary kicking. Now, in retrospect, I would have probably liked to have seen a few more hand combinations here. We really just saw kind of the 2 chop punches there towards the end and then the semi-longer hand combo in the beginning. So not a whole lot of hand technique content, but overall a very good form, showing off some great kicking ability. And then now we go to Anis Sherfa, at the time considered to be arguably the best tricker on the planet. So we're going to see his tricking go on display here in 19th place. and he was just so long, made his hand combos look so unique because the extension of those chops and punches is just crazy. Huge cork round. That's probably the biggest cork round that I've ever seen done in a form. And I think that this form is probably underrated as well. This one probably deserves to be above 19th place. Now, I do agree with this being past Gemma because Anise is obviously demonstrating a lot more hand techniques. The tricking difficulty is a lot greater. Obviously, Anise probably can't kick like Gemma to win, but the kicking is just one element of it. And I don't like the fact that we actually didn't get to see that form finish. I would have liked to have seen kind of that closing hand combo and going to the end of this form. But I don't disagree with it being Gemma and then this form because I think that Anise showed off some incredible athleticism and martial arts skill in that form. And now we go to another French Open form. This is Chloe Bruce. I don't remember what year it said. It just showed it on screen. But this is Chloe Bruce, arguably one of the greatest sport karate kickers of all time. But I guess my criticism of this form would be kind of like we talked about in Gemma Nguyen's form, where even though Gemma mixed in some of the tricking with the kicking as well, it wasn't all just the stationary kicking. Gemma still had a little bit more diversity of movement. I feel like a lot of times in this Chloe Bruce form, we see a lot of just kind of the high kicks, and she's throwing in some of the jumping kicks, some of the tricking kicks as well. But we see almost an overuse of these high kicks. But to her credit, I mean, she's the best in the world at doing these 12 o'clock kicks, holding them straight up, machine gun kicks over and over again. And that's incredibly difficult to do. I mean, there's nobody else in the world that I know of that can do this the way that Chloe Bruce does it. So if I was judging this, and let's say the last three forms were in a division, I might give the edge to Gemma and Anise over this form, which is ranked higher by this YouTube video here. But I absolutely respect the difficulty of what it is that Chloe Bruce is doing. I mean, to be able to execute those kicks as consistently as she is doing, you don't see any balance instability. You see that pivot foot is completely still. And look at that, just holding that kick technique 12 o'clock like that is insane. And now we move on to 17th place. We have Frank Sammy of France competing at the Quebec Open. We see start off with the kind of running X out into the split. And that was kind of popular back in kind of the mid 2000s, I believe. I think we saw a lot of competitors doing that, standing X outs to splits, things of that nature. I think Kim Do used to do it a lot as well. And so, like I said, we've got 17th place here. And this is another one that I'm not sure that I would rank this form. And we see the hands there a little bit low on the hand angles, a little bit of underextension. So as of right now, I'm giving the edge to Anise as being a better form than the form that we're watching. Obviously, that was a nice trick combo there, landed cleanly, sets up the full step out. So notice how there was like a flash kick split of the legs there at the end. That's difficult to do. I like the look of that a lot. But overall, I just don't think that this form has the difficulty or the cleanliness that Anise's form did. And so right now, I still feel like Anise's form is probably the best form that we've seen up until we get to this point where we have 16th place with Mark Canonizato, the picture perfect Webster to the knee. That is absolutely beautiful. And then I always love seeing these vintage purple uniform tops that Team Straight Up used to have. I absolutely love them. Huge 720 right there going into, I believe that was more of a moon kick coming out of that gainer with kind of the hook axe kick hybrid there. Beautiful. I also love how in this form, Mark is representing his home school, the Florida Sport Martial Arts Academy. You can see on his pant leg, he's got the logo right there at the bottom at the ankle. And then just the cleanliness that Mark is showing here and the side kick to the gainer, that's beautiful. This cleanliness that he's demonstrating here is far beyond what we've seen from any of the other competitors. He's got the difficulty. He's got the great tricking. His tricking is effective. He's kicking hard. So that form, I think, is well rated as far as being ahead of the forms that we've seen so far. But I also think that it's underrated because I think that the form that we just saw Mark Canonizato do is a little bit better than this form that we're seeing from Sebastian Coquin here. And forgive me if I'm butchering some of these names, the French names I might struggle with. So swipe knife there, going right into the double leg. That's a difficult move. He's definitely got difficulty comboing that, going up into the standing flash. And then his hands aren't bad. His hands are coming straight, coming right off the shoulder, a little bit of underextension at times. But overall, just the cleanliness of the performance in general, kind of the clean cut sharpness that Mark Canonizato has. We don't really see it in this form. So again, if I was judging this as a division, I would probably go with that last Mark Canonizato form over this form, but no disrespect to that form whatsoever. Diamond Nationals 2006, we have a very young Austin Crane. But Austin Crane, I feel like, earns his spot on this list with this form. This is a very good form. I was surprised when I saw how good this form was, just considering how young Austin Crane was at the time. Just for some context, we see Dre Rice in the purple uniform top to the right in the background, Sammy Smith with the blonde hair and the black uniform over to the left. And then that's a beautiful combo there going into the full after the aerial from Austin Crane. Right up into the cork. I mean, to be doing that at his age back in 2006, that was huge. That was something that Taylor Lautner was getting a lot of popularity for, being able to hit those corkscrews like that. But Austin Crane just executed that to near perfection. Then check this out. Austin Crane hits the statue, and that is Matt Emig sitting right behind him. One of Matt Emig's signature moves was always the statue, and a young Austin Crane runs up, does the statue right in Matt Emig's face. I think that that's the coolest thing ever. And then, as we know, Matt and Austin obviously would grow to be great friends and do sync together. Arguably one of the greatest sync forms of all time. And speaking of which, here at, I believe this is 13th place, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, we've got 13th place. We got Matt Emig at the French Open. Now you can tell just from his build that this is a younger Matt Emig. This is not quite prime Matt Emig yet. This is Matt Emig when he's kind of getting into his prime, in my opinion. And I believe this is pre-knee injury as well. It has to be, I think. And then one of the things that I love about this form is that we see the swag from Matt Emig. You noticed when he landed, I believe it was a raise a little bit early in the form, he just kind of lands and turns around and looks at everybody. That's very characteristic of Matt. Matt was somebody who always knew how good he was, and he showed that in his performances, and he was always an excellent showman. Now we get to one of my favorite competitors of all time in terms of their hand combinations, Rudy Raynon, opening the form with a big gainer variation there. This was Rudy Raynon with the gold streak through his hair phase. It's funny, you can kind of tell the story of Rudy Raynon's career by the way that he changed his hairstyle throughout. I think that shaved head Rudy was probably one of the best Rudys. He ran some dope comma forms back when he had his head shaved, but I digress. And so we see here the beautiful jackknife going on down into the 540 to knee, huge opening up on the kick there and then dropping down into the split. And then just the speed and the precision of this form is great. Beach twist to the gainer, the full extension on the hand combinations. Now, Rudy's stances is something that I've heard people criticize him about before. And granted, his back knee does stay bent in the majority of his front stances, but that was almost part of Rudy's style. And as we go into this huge opening from Sammy Vasquez, I'm actually going to go ahead and rewind this real quick, just so that we can get a second look at Rudy's form and kind of the execution of some of these stances here. And this is one thing that if you go back and you watch, your Carmichael Simons and your John Valeras and your Mike Chats, kind of the 90s era of extreme forms, you'll see very similar stances to what Rudy was doing. A little bit higher, back leg typically bent, more of a lunge stance than a true front stance than what we would do in today's sport karate scene. There we saw him locking out his back leg on a couple of shift chop punches. But again, I think that the standard of cleanliness was different back then. It wasn't as strict as it is now with the back leg being straight on the front stances. And it was almost, it played a role in Rudy's style, the speed that he was able to demonstrate when he was doing his stances like that. Maybe I'm just making excuses because I like Rudy, but to me, that was just kind of part of his style and maybe something that carried over from that 90s generation where stances really weren't as much of a factor in extreme forms as they are today. Because today in the modern sport karate scene, there's a heavy importance placed on stances. And now we go into 11th place and the last form of this video, the first half of the rankings, this top 20 musical forms of all time. We have one of the greatest performers in sport karate history, Sammy Vasquez. Now, I don't recall if he was already on Team Straight Up at the time, but I know that he spent a good bit of his career representing Team Straight Up. We saw the huge opening move with the front flip, setting up the giant flash kick. We see the cork pop flash going into the side swipe, into the raise, right into the cork. And then he goes for the split after the cork, but it looked like he may have split and rolled out of it just a little bit. Maybe it was just a fast transition. Kind of hard to tell if that was really a mistake or not, but regardless, he did a good job of covering it up. And then to me, here's the highlight of this form right here. He gets the crowd into it. The French Open crowd always got into it. Boom, he does the double statue, grabs each leg as he rotates around, and then lands and just looks at that crowd in the back. I just think that is so baller. One of the coolest moments in sport karate history right there. Before this video ends, I'm going to rewind it so we can get one more taste of that. Here we have the big combo, the cork pop flash, side swipe raise to the cork, and then the split. The more I watch that, the more it does seem like he kind of didn't quite land the split and had to roll out of it, but he did cover it up nicely. So if a judge wasn't paying 100% attention, or maybe just got caught up in the moment there, that's something that maybe even could have gone unnoticed by the judging panel. And then watch this. I mean, this is just insane. He goes up one leg, two legs, boom, and then lands. You see Matt Emig going crazy in the background. I mean, that is just such a cool move, and the way that he landed it. And he stuck it too. It's not like he stepped out of it. It's not like he spun out of it. He landed, boom, stuck it and looked at everybody. Excellent form there by Sammy Vasquez. You see the credit to the YouTube channel there. So go ahead and check out this kind of vintage YouTube channel here. As we move into the second video, and we have the best musical forms of all time, 10th place going all the way down to first place. And we start with Steve Tirada, 2004. Looks like he's performing in France here. And this is an awesome form. We see some really unique kind of transition, tricking skills shown off in this form. Anybody that knows Steve Tirada knows that he became a part of Quest Crew, what would go on to win America's Next Best Dance Crew with that team. Now we see him doing an egg roll transition there. We kind of tucked his body sideways and rolled over. That was not a mistake. That was a move that he called the egg roll. He did stumble a little bit on the landing coming out of that, and for this to be one of the top 10 musical forms of all time, I don't necessarily like there being even a little bit of a stumble in there. Huge statue there. He gets full extension, but at the same time, I understand that Steve Tirada certainly deserves a spot in this top 10 or in the top 20 at least, because of his place in the history of musical forms development and all of the innovations that he made. I mean, he played I think he may have been the first person he either was the first person to land a snafu swipe, period, or the first person doing it in a form. Don't quote me on that, but he plays a very significant role in tricking history and sport karate history. I just wish that maybe a cleaner form of his would have been selected for this top 10, but I digress. So Steve Tirada, he earned his place in this top 10. And now we get to a kind of strange one. We get to Jeff Robitaille at the French Open. And while Jeff Robitaille is obviously a very athletic, very talented, extreme martial artist, I don't know if this is a form that I would put in the top 10 musical forms of all time. I could maybe see it sliding into the back end of that top 20, but it's, and no disrespect at all, because he's a great martial artist with great athleticism. But with the standard of cleanliness and some of the tricks that some of the American competitors were doing at the time, I don't really see this as being of that caliber. However, the crowd got into it, and this is a great performance. Don't get me wrong. So no disrespect to Jeff Robitaille at all. And again, forgive me if I'm butchering some of these names that are a little bit more difficult to pronounce. We see him showing off his speed. He gets great hang time, obviously tons of air on that triple flash kick, kicking over the top. So I respect the athleticism and the performance value of that form. And now we get into 8th place. We've got Kim Do, and this is the infamous Big X out there. This is the infamous choreographed routine that he does to all of the sound effects and, all of like the movie moves that he does, like the Street Fighter techniques and stuff like that. So there's so much about this form that I love. I don't think that this is the 8th best musical form of all time. I believe that it should be ranked above that, because this is one of the last great forms that we've seen that was truly choreographed to the music. It's reminiscent of like the old school, like Jean Frenet, where all of the techniques are choreographed to the music. Granted, this is a bunch of sound effects that Kim Do is doing the form to, and I know that you can't hear it because I'm commentating, so I've kept the volume off of the videos, but I highly recommend for everybody to go and check out this number 8 spot, because I really do think that this should be rated higher. Now, Kim Do does have a little bit of a misstep in this form, but it's more so of a step back than it is a stumble. So maybe that little bit of a step back is what bumped him down to 8th place instead of ranking higher. But still, this form was just so innovative. We see him doing the flying squirrel variation there on the jump. All of these hand techniques here, not only fully extended, but also choreographed to music. There we see the signature move, punching up to the sky there. Love to see that. We see the nice back stance when he hits the double knife hand block there. And then this tricking combo, although it is creative and unique, a little bit of breakdancing in there, this is incredibly difficult to grab the leg like that. That's what I'm talking about, where he kind of stepped back out of it. Not technically a stumble, but just a little bit of a step back. We see the kicking combination there. And then that is just an all-time great form there from Kim Do. step back coming out of that like axe aerial or not. I mean, that is just incredible. Speaking of signature moves, we have Caitlin Deshelle with that beautiful Webster right there at the beginning. This is back when, based on the uniform, this was back when Caitlin Deshelle was co-representing Team Paul Mitchell and Team XMA Revolution, the only competitor that I know of to ever represent Team Paul Mitchell and another team simultaneously. Very interesting era in sport karate history as XMA Revolution was coming into existence. Taylor Lautner was on that team. Jacob Cable, Nassandra Kissel. They certainly had a great squad there of extreme martial artists, and there were more other than that. And then we see Caitlin. I mean, really, she's doing a bunch of techniques that were ahead of her time here. We see another one of her signatures, the illusion twist, that time going into the split and then finishing strong. The only thing I don't like about this form, and it could just be the camera angle, is that it's very much front to back, front to back. It kind of just goes forward and back. It doesn't have a lot much more movement to that, but it could be part of the camera angle here and just the way that we're looking at it. So I'm not going to be too critical of the way that that form was laid out. And that was also a pretty common way to lay out a form back in this time period. So you can't really criticize that too much. We saw her doing a corkscrew earlier in this routine. That was definitely ahead of its time. That was something that Caitlin was certainly an innovator for. And then there we go again with the illusion to split. I'm just showing some more of this because as far as women's sport karate history goes, I mean, Caitlin is one of the all-time greats. Caitlin is the most decorated competitor in the history of forms and weapons competition. She's won more U.S. Opens than anybody else. She's won as many diamond rings as anybody else in forms and weapons. I mean, her accomplishments are just incredible. And then we see the signature ending there with the punch to the sky, which is something that all of the members of XMA Revolution did. I remember learning the XMA program when I was a kid, and anytime we'd finish that XMA form, we'd have to do that punch to the sky to end the routine. So that certainly brings back some good nostalgia, some good memories there. And now we see Mark Canonizato with the standing X out to start this form. And again, just like we saw all the way at the form that was back in, let's see, where was that form ranked? That form that was back in 16th place, that probably should be ranked a lot higher than 16th place. We're going to see some more of the same in this form from Mark Canonizato. The cleanliness, the technical execution, the beautiful side kick going right into the back stance. That's the best, that might be the best back stance that I've ever seen executed in a CMX form. It's hard to take that moment and stop yourself and hit that stance like that. Mark Canonizato was a master of doing that, showing that traditional martial arts solid foundation, which I love to see. And then we see, I think this is a step up in speed from what we saw in the earlier form from Mark Canonizato. Beautiful setup going into the corkscrew. I believe that was a corkscrew round. Kind of hard to tell because of the video quality, but it looked like that foot may have flicked out there for the round kick. We see the beautiful, huge back tuck, comboing it, changing direction, going straight into the flash kick combo there. We see him setting up another one of those signature Mark Canonizato side kicks right to the double knife hand, B-twist to the back, to the knee. That is crispy clean. That is a beautiful form. That is deserving of its spot. Love to see that. And now as we get into the top five, we are going to get a Matt Imig showcase. If anybody's ever watched this countdown before, you know that 4 of the top 5 forms in this top 5 are Matt Imig forms. And as the greatest, in my opinion, CMX forms competitor of all time, Matt certainly deserves that spot. However, I don't know if I would have selected all of these forms that wound up getting ranked. Obviously, we see a crazy tricking combo here, but Matt stumbled out of it. He kind of had to like throw that little baby hook kick to go to the split to save it. And if you make that big of a mistake, obviously Matt, the ultimate showman, the greatest extreme forms competitor of all time, obviously he kept going with it and he still turned this into a good form. But when there's a mistake like that, I don't know that you can say that this was the 5th best form that happened from 2007 dating on back. But I respect the fact that it's Matt Imig, so I'm not going to be overly critical of that. However, I would like to see the top 5 not have any stumbles in it. And then now we have, in my opinion, a very underrated competitor. A lot of people remember Craig Henningsen most because of Sideswipe and being on America's Got Talent. But he was a very, very formidable extreme forms competitor when he was in the ring. We see him here at the U.S. Open. He's throwing down. We've seen every trick landed to perfection. No stumbles, no bobbles, not having to spin out of his techniques, landing cleanly. We see the beautiful multiple flash kick there. And then notice how the skip front kick there, he skipped front kicked and he kicked with the ball of his foot, which I love to see. I see too many people now on the skip front kick or even just a basic front kick. I see too many people using the toes on that kick. I love to see it when somebody's actually kicking with the ball of the foot. I'm replaying this one again just so we can appreciate it, because I do feel, like I said, that Craig Henningsen is an underrated competitor. Now, is this the fourth best musical form of all time going up into 2007? There's certainly nothing wrong with it. I feel like there could have been a little bit more difficulty. I feel like we had seen more difficulty from other competitors, but at the same time, some of those other competitors that had more difficulty also had some minor stumbles that would have bumped them down. So from a cleanliness perspective, and from the fact that I think that Craig Henningsen in general is an underrated competitor that people need to remember more often, I'll give him this spot. I don't mind giving him this fourth place spot. We see the Webster there. It does look like there might have been a little bit of a balance falter on the Webster, which may not make this form deserving of the fourth place spot, but I'll go with it there. And then now we see Matt Emig at the Diamond Nationals. This is in third place. And this is another area where, yes, Matt's incredible. We see the double 9 there. That's beautiful. Double B twist to the knee. That's incredibly difficult. That first section alone, sure, that could be deserving. We see the L kick, then going into the multiple flash kick. Everything that he does for the first 70% of this form is awesome and deserving of the third best musical form of all time. But then what we're going to notice here is he does the raise to the cork, which is great. And then he runs up here and just throws the aerial. And I know from watching a whole bunch of Matt Emig forms that if he was going for the aerial there, it probably wasn't an aerial. He was probably going for the brandy, which is a no-handed cartwheel. We're going to replay that one more time, into a statue or into a flash kick. And it's quite clear to me, as somebody that knows Matt, that he didn't do what he was going for there. And so any Matt Emig form, I think that he hits clean. I think that you can make an argument is one of the top 3 best musical forms of all time. However, this particular form where he kind of bailed and went for the aerial, as we just saw the replay of, I don't know that you can give that the third place spot. So that's one little criticism that I have. Now, this form is iconic. Matt, he spits the water out. This is what they have rated as the second best musical form of all time. And then this form, I like this form because it gives a little bit of importance as he does the full step out there. Beautiful extension on that split kick to the knee. Notice how Matt is wearing the hand wraps here. I believe in Steve Terada's form, we saw that too. This is something that a lot of competitors in the 2000s would do to make their hands stand out more, because if you have a color, either white or black, around your wrists, the judges are going to see the movements of those hands a lot more clearly. So it was a great way of making your hand combos look better. And we haven't seen anybody do that in years and years and years. I haven't seen anybody do wrist wraps like that for a creative, extreme, or musical form, really, probably since before 2010. And so there we have a high energy Matt form. The energy of that form is why I think it's in that second place spot. Now, this form, I have no problem with it being considered up until 2007 the best musical form of all time. Can we take a moment? Can we take a moment? Can we rewind just a little bit? I know we're catching the tail end of that Matt form. The tornado kick probably wasn't the best technique to end that form with, but can we take a moment? Okay. Watch this opening hand combo, okay? We see the opening hand combo, power, extension, speed, D-leg right into the 1080. That is incredibly difficult to do, especially for back in this time period. This is pre-2007, and he's doing D-leg pop 1080s and hitting them cleanly in a form. That is insane. The reason that this form, in my opinion, deserves that spot as the best musical form up until 2007, look at the power, look at the extension, look at the stances, look at the extension of the kicks. Look at the cleanliness of the kicks. Look at the difficulty of the tricking in this routine to do the D leg to the pop 10, the huge cheat 7 to split into the kip up, and he comes up slowly, ending the form with style. We got to see that one more time, just to celebrate kind of the greatness of Matt Emig in that last form that he hit. Now, could you make an argument with me that there are other forms that maybe should be the best musical form of all time up until 2007? Absolutely. There's arguments to be made. There's people that aren't even on this list that probably should have been on this list. A huge oversight on this list. Where are some of those forms from the 90s? Where are, and as we're going to watch this Matt Emig form again, Where's Carmichael Simon the first time that he did the 720? Where's Mike Chat in the form that he got all tens with at the US Open? Where is John Valera, one of the greatest CMX competitors of all time, who was an innovator of tricking and an innovator of open forms competition? Where are those competitors? Marcel Jones was active before 2007, and I believe that he is one of the cleanest competitors of all time. Where are his forms? And there's other omissions from this list as well. And so I feel like some of these forms that had some stumbles or some missteps in them, you could probably bump those further back and then put in at higher places some of these forms from these all-time great competitors that we really haven't seen anything of. I mean, you could even go back and look at some Kevin Thompson. Kevin Thompson had some incredible forms that he did to music that demonstrated a great deal of power and athleticism that were just on another level. And then even though technically you consider, you know, soft style or Chinese style wushu forms to be in a different category, there are great wushu forms that were done to music that could deserve to be on this list. Your Richard Brandons and your Ming Lu's and your DX, those are all competitors that were active pre-2007 that are some of the greatest Chinese style martial artists to have competed in sport karate. They did forms to music. Those are musical forms. Where are they on this list? So I do think that there are some pretty big omissions from this list, but overall, when we get to the top 10, we see a bunch of Matt Emig, we see some Mark Canonizato, we see Caitlin Deschelle, who's arguably the greatest female forms of weapons competitor of all time. Certainly statistically, she can lay claim to that title. And so we see Craig Henningsen, who I think has always been underrated. He was a member of Sideswipe, made it into the final round of America's Got Talent, or the top 8, whatever it was. And so I really don't have too many problems with the top 10 outside of if there was a form with a stumble in it, let's replace that with a form that was more deserving from a competitor that didn't get featured. And I know that this is, you know, probably just somebody who's a fan of the sport that made a top 20 just for fun of their favorite forms. And that's, at the end of the day, that's something that's very important to remember, is that the top 20 forms of all time really comes down to personal opinion and what you believe to be the best forms that you've ever seen, which is now why I want to ask the audience, what are the best musical forms that you've ever seen, not just before 2007, but including 2007 on? And maybe that's something we can do in the future. Maybe we can find the top 20 musical forms of all time and do a countdown for 2008 up until present. I think that would be really exciting. So that's just an overview of one of the really classic sport karate videos. If you're a sport karate fan, you need to have watched the top musical forms of all time. That's anybody who's ever competed in sport karate that's a true fan of the sport. Everybody has watched those videos and looked at that ranking and debated, you know, who should be ranked higher, who shouldn't be on the list, who got the boot from the list that probably shouldn't have, right? So there's some excellent debates to be had there about the top 20 musical forms of all time. Once again, that was published 14 years ago. That was back in 2007. So maybe it's time for an updated list. So I want you guys to comment 2 things down in the comments, okay? Number 1, what did you think of this list? Who's missing? Who needs to be ranked higher? Who should have been ranked lower? Who got on the list but maybe didn't deserve it because of that form? Who deserves to be on the list, right? That's the first thing I want you guys to talk about down in the comments. And then number 2, put in the comments, what are the best musical forms from 2008 on? I've said on the podcast before, Matt Emig at the US Open in 2008 is probably the greatest musical form that I've ever seen with my own eyes. I love that routine. So I highly recommend you guys go and watch it. Also, after you finish watching this podcast, go and support that YouTube channel. You can see it in the video multiple times. Sebricci, Sebricci on YouTube. Go support that channel. Go watch that video and go give the views to the guy who actually created this video in the first place. So all the credit goes to him. And thank you for preserving sport karate history in that way. I don't know if that person is still involved with the sport or watches this or watches the podcast or anything like that. But if you're out there listening, thank you for preserving that part of sport karate history. And thank you to everybody that continues to support and promote sport karate by preserving the history so that the next generation of champions can learn from all of the amazing things that have happened in the past of our sport, going all the way back into the late 70s and the early 80s and seeing kind of the first bow staff spins and the first weapons releases and the first time somebody did a backflip with Mike Chat and the first 720 kick with Carmichael Simon. There's so many great innovations that have happened over the years. and so many people don't know about them because no one talks about sport karate history enough. But that's what this podcast is for. This podcast is to keep sport karate history alive by telling the stories of the champions of today, interviewing the champions of yesterday so that everybody can get to learn what it was like back in the day, and bringing these videos to light so that more people can grow a love and an appreciation for sport karate. So that's all I've got for you today. Have those debates about the top 20 musical forms of all time in the comments. If you like this podcast, make sure that you give it a share. That's how this podcast continues to grow, and we can get more guests and bigger and better guests and get the biggest names you want. And if there's somebody that you specifically want to hear from on this show, drop those names in the comments, tag them, share it, tag them when you share it, because that's how we're going to create the best show that we possibly can and get everybody from all of the significant role players in sport karate history are going to be featured on the Jax Rudolph podcast eventually. So once again, thank you everybody for tuning in. Thank you to Black Belt Magazine for being an incredible sponsor and host of the podcast. This has been episode 61, Musical Form Film Study, the top 20 musical forms of all time. It's up for debate. I'm your host, Jackson Rudolph, and I'll see you next time.